Hello and welcome to the Dread Expanse. I'm Mitch the Quack and I hope you're having a less quack day than myself. Before we begin, for those who have been around the channel for a while, you've probably noticed the new channel icon that came with this upload. This brilliant artwork was created by an artist and fan of the channel called Pain Fairy. Pain Fairy gifted me this amazing image and I can't put into words how grateful and humbled I am for the amount of effort put into it. And so from the bottom of my heart I just wanted to thank Pain Fairy and publicly acknowledge who created such an amazing image. I'd also ask, if you guys can, watch Pain Fairy's DeviantArt page. They deserve the attention. The link will be in the description below. Okay, today we're going to be talking about a lore point that I've seen mentioned in quite a few places. A lore point that, despite being mentioned so often, seems to have been brushed aside for later, even though this point looks like it's going to be one of, if not the most important bit of lore to come out of Shadowlands. That lore point is, how did Terenas Menethil know? How did Terenas know?
There must always be a Lich King.
Now, to be completely transparent, I have on record said that I thought the ghost of Terenas Menethil at the end of ICC was Yogg-Saron. With this theory, I'm going to contradict previous content, and depending on how believable you think this theory is, I'm going to prove my own theory wrong. Or at the very least prove myself wrong on a few specific lore points. So for this theory, let me make this clear. The spirit that saved us from Frostmourne, the one that held his son in his arms, and the one that told us
there must always be a Lich King
was not Yogg-Saron in disguise, but it was the Terenas Menethil, the King of Lordaeron. And oh damn, if this statement is true. Well, on the outset, there's actually no reason why Terenas Menethil should know about the Jailer, the Shadowlands, or the Maw. Yes, he was the King of Lordaeron, but this type of information is not something mortals have intimate knowledge of, especially humans. So, why atop ICC did Terenas tell us
there must always be a Lich King?
Was he being controlled? Did he learn something while he was inside the Blade? Etc, etc. In general, these are the two questions and in turn assumptions that permeate this point of lore, and rightly so. For the most part, there is no reason to think Terenas would have known anything about the origins of the Lich King's power, the Jailer, or the Shadowlands. Or at least, that is the case until you consider arguably the oddest location in all of ICC, which at this point I am personally convinced was supposed to fill in the gaps over a decade ago and hint at a massive amount of stories that could still be told in the World of Warcraft universe related to Lich King and death. That location is the Halls of Reflection. You see, here is all the official information we actually have about the Halls of Reflection. It's located deep within ICC, it's quite obviously been designed to look like a dark mirror of the Lordaeron throne room, it was where Frostmourne was stored when Arthas was Lich King, and it's a place where a person can commune with the spirits inside of Frostmourne. That's it. Other than those 4 points, there's literally nothing. The Halls of Reflection just turned up out of nowhere at the end of Wrath with little to no solid explanation behind the who or the why. Just about every bit of well-known information related to the Halls of Reflection is speculation. Nothing more, nothing less. So with that in mind, what if I told you it makes more sense that the Halls of Reflection was built to replicate the Lordaeron throne room, but not because Arthas was having an ego trip? Or better yet, what if I told you it makes a lot more sense the Halls of Reflection have always been there, and it's quite possible the halls are what Arthas found in the north before he returned as a Death Knight? What if I told you Terenas knew about the power of the Lich King, the Jailer, and death, however not because of Arthas or his time in the Blade, but instead because of his duty as king? And what if I told you there must always be a Lich King was never referenced in the succession of ICC? If this sounds quacked already, don't worry, it gets worse. A topic that has been a long-standing point of interest within the lore, or for me, ever since I started speculating, has been the eeriness of Silverpine Forest and Tirisfal Glade. When Chronicle 1 first came out, I was almost convinced Tyr and the Sithraxi were the sole answer to my question. Then, in those early days, I was introduced to the Lordaeron throne room by Shinies and Lucky Doos, who, to be frank, are experts on the subject and are a big reason why this specific theory exists. They showed me how important Lordaeron is to everything, and after discussing the topic off and on for months, going on years now, there is no question amongst us that the throne and those markings on the floor are connected to the very off atmosphere in the area. The question we've always been asking, though, is why? Well, if this theory, a more personal and baseless one I might add, is even remotely correct, that eeriness is caused by those markings on the floor, and are either a disrupted portal or a partially completed summoning circle directly connected to the Shadowlands. I mean, it would explain that old lore point of Arthas wanting to set up the Scourge capital in Lordaeron, even though it's been made pretty clear in-universe defending Lordaeron is far from an easy and or tactically sound task. It would also add a bit of context as to why Varimathras was able to use the Royal Quarter of the Undercity as a summoning hub during the attack on the Undercity, the implication being he was able to tap into the power of the floor. And on a more abstract note, this also adds context as to why the Horde version of the Kilrogg fight during Hellfire Citadel was located in the Royal Quarter, the assumption being in that possible future we figured out the importance of the Lordaeron Floor, but lost to the Legion despite our best efforts. Either way, this all comes back to the similarities between the Throne Room and the Halls of Reflection. Now, I will concede, I cannot 100% prove the Halls of Reflection were built before the Lordaeron Throne, or even put a defined timestamp on when they were created. I mean, if you go with the assumption Arthas created a replica in the Halls of Reflection, the question becomes, why? The answer that follows, minus the possible ego trip Arthas was on, becomes Arthas was trying to mimic whatever was attempted in Lordaeron, which, when you consider what happens at the start of Shadowlands and the general plot of the expansion, isn't that hard to put together. The throne, whatever it is, can probably act as a conduit of power, and it seems as if Frostmourne and in turn the Helm of Domination were either feeding the Maw or drawing power from it. Also, as of recording this theory, a dev interview with SA Gamer was released, and where it is all very insightful, something that came up was bells and how the Kyrian used them as a way to amplify their power and thoughts, will also bring out certain aspects of their person, very similar to the Divine Bell in Pandaria. The reason I bring this up is for two reasons. Firstly, going on a year and a half ago, I made this piece of content that made the case sound in World of Warcraft is related to the elements, and in some way, shape or form is related to the element of spirit. With that interview, I'm kind of shocked how topical the content is and how the sub-element part of the theory seems to be semi-accurate. In any case, sound is used by the Kyrian as a form of amplification. This leads on to the second point. If you've ever been to the Undercity and wandered around the ruins of Lordaeron, you know you can find the fallen bell that welcomed Arthas before he killed Terenas, and if you actually use in-game sound, you'd also know you can still hear the bell chimes of that day, as well as other haunting whispers throughout the keep. You can even find the wandering spirits of dead Lord Aronians if you use stealth detection in the keep. But this may just be a haunted location. It's kind of interesting how Frostmourne's location in the Halls of Reflection is partially identical to the bell in Lordaeron, give or take the distance. Couple this with the fact the bell is just outside the location the haunted spirits occupy, it raises an interesting implication about whether Arthas was at least partially trying to mimic the original purpose of the Lordaeron bell. That purpose possibly being the amplification of a person's spirit, or a possible way to amplify the powers of death in the Shadowlands in the area. Now, on the other hand, if you assume the Halls of Reflection were always there, the purpose and most of the implication I just mentioned remain the same. However, a few incredibly interesting pieces of lore begin to tie together. I mean, when Arthas went north, he wasn't being led to nothing. Something was out there, and upon his return, he was a Death Knight. Now, the obvious implication is Arthas found ICC. However, I think he was specifically led to the Halls of Reflection. The reason why is that for Arthas to go north and reach ICC without getting completely detoured by Titan remnants means he would have ended up scaling the Wrathgate mountainside of ICC, which just happens to be the place we emerged from during our escape from the Halls of Reflection. If I was to guess, that gauntlet we used to escape the halls may have been the original path Arthas used to get into ICC. What's also interesting about this possibility is that if Arthas did find the Halls of Reflection and glean some knowledge about what the Kings of Lordaeron actually do, succeeding you, Father, the English translation of that scene, makes a lot more sense, but also raises a lot more questions. The big one being, If Tyrannus was actually referencing the succession of Lordaeron atop ICC, who, how, and why is his family connected to this power? I think the answer to that question got 100% confirmed in BFA, but hinted at in Wrath. Now, I still need to make a theory about why the Bonslamti cinematic is so important from a lore perspective. However, long story short, the major lore significance of that cinematic has literally nothing to do with the trolls, and has everything to do with the creation of deals. If spirits can bind themselves to bloodlines, I'm willing to guarantee you that concept is going to be a major part of human lore moving forward. I mean, this separate theory stems from the idea there's more to Varian's connection to Gauldren than what's being described, and upon realizing this theory about Tyrannus, it became very clear this binding of bloodlines to greater powers is definitely related to the Menethils. This concept leads on to a partial why that fits both possibilities, and I think at the very least proves the broader idea of this theory being correct. If the Prime Designated dies, re-originate Azeroth. This idea of rulers, or let's be frank here, wardens, being needed to watch over their charges is not a new concept on Azeroth, and is heavily tied to the Titans. Now, we know the Titans had some information on the Shadowlands. Helia's warning to Odin is proof enough, without the Halls of Valor's similarities to Oribus and Bastion being added. In another theory I put out a while ago, we also feel like I at the very least explained why it's highly likely there was some form of Titan influence in ICC prior to the Lich King, which, for those who haven't watched that theory, overall the argument boils down to there is no way the Titans put a block of ice as big and as creepy as Icecrown so close to Ulduar without a reason, and there's proof to support the idea. Anyway, the implied question is, if the Titans did create these portals and or portal in Lordaeron, why did they create it and who did they put in charge of it? Well, I'm not going to say Helia, even though there's a real yet slim possibility it may have been her. I'm not going to say Tyr, only because I think he probably played a similar role to Ra-Den in this scenario, as in similar to Ulduar and the Mogishan Vaults, Tyr was the keeper that oversaw everything related to the throne, but was not directly responsible for the day-to-day activities. This leaves the possibility of an unnamed Titanforged. A Titanforged who was either the original inhabitant of Lordaeron before the Vrykul migration south, or probably one of the Titanforged that migrated south when things started to go wrong with Loken. Either way, one or both were probably sealed off during the Winterscorn War, and or just after Tyr's death, so no one could access the power within. Eventually, I think the Curse of Flesh caught up with this Titanforged, and either by necessity or accident, I think they started a lineage bound to the containment of this throne and or thrones. Then something happened. I don't know precisely what, but I am willing to bet it had something to do with the Armani Trolls, sometime around, during, or in the aftermath of the Troll Wars. The reason why I'm certain something happened around this time is because the Armani gained control of Tirisfal and the location that would eventually become the capital of Lordaeron during the war. And thinking about it, this is the simplest explanation behind the disappearance of Tyr's hand. Anyway, this is the only time in the region's history a force outside of the humans controlled the area, except for maybe the elves, who are technically the third option behind who created the throne. However, that possibility only ties into the Arthas recreating the throne in ICC version of this theory. Regardless, assuming the throne is still some form of closed portal that had been left untouched for millennia, I would be willing to bet the Armani desecrated the area and opened it, possibly letting something loose. What that something is for another speculation. However, the proof this seems to be the case initially appears in Chronicle Volume 1, where out of nowhere this line is dropped. There are also whispers of something else stirring in the darkened forests. Tales of strange voodoo rituals and supernatural beings prowling the wilds in the dead of night. The next page of Chronicle seemingly clarifies this statement with the Zandalari's presence and their ability to summon lower. That is until you read what the Zandalari actually guarantee. There they promise to help the Armani plan for their impending conflict. More importantly, the Zandalari would ensure the lower demigods would aid the trolls in battle. Considering everything we've seen in BFA, That is an odd statement. The Loa barely listen to the Zandalari, and are far from their beck and call. The only way a troll can 100% ensure a Loa's quote-unquote help is with blood magic, and where that may seem odd at first, considering there is an Altar of Xul in the hinterlands, and it's literally located next to Jinthal Law, the place named after the Amani leader during the Troll Wars, it's not hard to guess which Zandalari, or more precisely, who, went to help the Amani. Interestingly enough, this does explain Hakar's connection to Jinthal Law, alien egg questline from Vanilla. However, it also creates a very interesting sub-theory about the things the Amani actually called upon during the Troll War. You see, I was informed by Locke from Chinese Encyclopedias that the Altar of Xul in the hinterlands has a connection to Zul'Farrak. To create the Mallet of Zul'Farrak, the thing that summons Gazrilla, you had to get the mallet from the Altar of Xul and empower it in Jinthal Law. The reason this is important, other than another unrelated implication, is that this creates a thread to Moizala's influence being present during the Troll Wars. What's even more interesting though is Shadra Law, which is also nearby in the hinterlands. During Vanilla, Horde players helped a Forsaken by gathering venom from the spiders in the area. Now, what's initially interesting about this is the existence of Maldraxxus, and at least on the outset, the region's seeming connection to spiders. What pushes this interest over the edge, however, is when you consider the fact that if you've ever paid attention to the quests that related to the Forsaken's blight/poisons, a stupid amount of them happen to relate to the refinement and testing of various types of spider venom. Add the fact there is an old quest in Tirisfal, I know someone mentioned to me ages ago, that mentions there was an ancient plague in the area that killed thousands of people, and for whatever reason, the vicious nightweb spiders in the area naturally preserved parts of the plague, which when you consider the fact there is a House of Plagues in Maldraxxus, and in at least one of the quests within the zone we are tasked with stopping at least one of the plagues from the house spreading, it's not hard to make a connection to Shadra's influence over spiders and the influence of Maldraxxus being present during the Troll Wars. Overall, this sub-theory reinforces the idea Amani trolls had tapped into the Shadowlands during this time period, and considering where this theory was going before this tangent, it's highly likely the trolls attempted to gain more power from the Shadowlands using the throne, and probably broke something in the process. And I mean, if we consider Moizala's presence could have been a factor during the war, it's also very possible he was attempting to orchestrate something related to the Maw and the Jailer during the chaos. I should also mention, similar to the elves, the trolls could have been the reason the floor needed to be created. However, they also specifically fit into the idea that Arthas created the Halls of Reflection to mimic the Lordaeron throne. Now, this catastrophic destruction happens, probably out of greed or desperation, and for all intents and purposes, things start to go horribly wrong. The Amani probably tapped into the Maw, lost control, the humans turned up, chaos ensued, etc. Things were probably heading towards a worldwide GG, that is until the descendants of that unnamed Titanforged, and or just an equally brave and stupid soul, managed to close the breach. The cost of this act was the binding of their lineage to the Maw, and created a scenario where there must always be a Lich King, for without one, all would come to ruin. Or at the very least, this bloodline got turned into a key of sorts, which when activated, has a very real chance of doing a controlled version of what Sylvanas did to the ICC Skybox. Now, the reason this ties to the Lich King is because of what Frostmourne technically does and what happened to Arthas. You see, when it comes to blood, anima, and spirit, there is an argument that can be made that states all are the same substance, just in different states. And I do need to make a follow-up to Animate Machinery of Death explain that further. Anyway, with that in mind, consider the idea the Menethil line of spirits are attached to the throne. Think about what Frostmourne technically does, and furthermore, think about what happened to Arthas, who literally merged his soul with an Azul, who at the time, I assume, was basically under the control of the Jailer, and or possibly something worse. The bond in the Menethil line should have been passed into Frostmourne, because it literally eats souls in their entirety. So, assumedly, it should have absorbed the Menethil bond when it was used to kill Terenas, meaning the reason Terenas knows there must always be a Lich King is because he at the very least realized what happened and deduced the armor set now contains the bond of his family, the bond keeping whatever was stopped in Lordaeron all those centuries ago in check. There's just one problem with this part of the theory. If this is true, how come when the Lich King woke up, he didn't activate the Halls of Reflection if it was there to begin with, or even after it was possibly built? This is where things get interesting. Talanji is an only child, and inherited the full deal from her father. But what would have happened if she had a sibling? Possibly an older sibling, specifically sticking to the age concepts related to inheritance. I don't think Frostmourne got all of the key. I think it's quite likely pieces were passed to Frostmourne directly. However, only half of the key was obtained after Arthas inherited it from Terenas, and either through prolonged exposure to the Helm, Frostmourne, and or the merging with Ner'zhul did half of the key finally fall under the Jailer's control. The other half, as you've probably already guessed, went to Kaelia. This opens up a whole can of worms for her possible importance in the future, and her daughter's importance, because, as is quite evident, Kaelia died, and assuming these bonds don't linger in the dead, her daughter should now have one half of the Menethil key to the Lordaeron throne. It also brings back those interesting questions about Derek Proudmoore, and whether despite Bane's efforts, Sylvanas completed her work. This brings us to the destruction of ICC, the fall of Lich King, and Sylvanas' breaking of the Veil, because where it is quite obvious that hole in the sky was caused by Sylvanas basically brute forcing the Veil open with the amount of power inside the helm, and from everything I've been talking about, at least half of the Menethil key, there is still one question within that entire interaction that still remains unanswered. Why did Sylvanas leave Bolvar alive? Is it possible that because of his tenure as Lich King, he inherited part of the key that is still needed for something else later? I mean, that could give context as to why he is a usurper. More interestingly, if Taelia is the daughter of Kaelia and Bolvar, if Bolvar dies, the rest of that key should be passed on to her, meaning she will have inherited the full weight of the Menethil line. I mean, there has also been plenty of speculation recently about the possibilities of us having to rebuild the Helm of Domination. On top of that, the Blades of the Fallen Prince are still MIA, and contain Ner'zhul's spirit, who, despite having his spirit destroyed multiple times, could have a connection to this key, raising the possibility of the Helm and Ner'zhul's return sometime in Shadowlands as well. Overall, the main takeaway from this theory is there must always be a Lich King. However, at present, the throne is empty. Keep an eye out for Terenas Menethil, because there is a very real possibility that his family and the land of Lordaeron have been connected to the Shadowlands from the very beginning, and are going to have a bigger role in the future of the story than they already have when it comes to death in World of Warcraft. Oh, and one more completely, unequivocally quacked idea you might want to consider. Have you ever wondered why Ultrak and the Hillsbrad foothills in-game are so weird in their layout? As in, on one side of the mountain you have gentle slopes, while on the other side you have a cliff face that basically drops into an inland lake in such a way you'd think the lake had produced ocean tides and eroded the mountain face. Well, if you assume the Halls of Reflection and the Lordaeron Throne are old Titan facilities, and both served as some form of entrance to their respective facilities, that quacked theory that I had a while ago about ICC being a Titan facility before it was reworked by the Nathrezim and the Nerubians doesn't sound that far-fetched. But what's truly staggering though, is that if you were to replace Fenris Lake with an ICC-sized tower flush against the cliff face of Ultrak and Lordaeron, you'd get a location that is eerily similar to ICC. That is just obviously at a lower elevation, so less ice. As in, the ice-capped mountain, places and lore surrounding the area that scream Titan influence. This list goes on, but overall it's just a bit too uncanny. Also, if you want an idea about what happened to that tower, ask yourself, why is there this inexplicable gap in the mountains of Silverpine Forest that perfectly line up with Lordaemer Lake and are quite clearly shown as one of the lowland areas of the zone? It's almost as if something massive enough to destroy a mountainside fell on that part of the zone, creating the lowland and destroying the mountains. And what could have caused such a massive structure to fall? Well, I have to say, it's kind of convenient how Silverpine is just adjacent to the zone a Keeper literally blew himself up in such a spectacular fashion, I might add. He practically killed one C-Thraxi and mortally wounded the other. But that's just a quack thought you might want to consider. Thanks for watching.